Did Jesus really exist, or is he just a myth like Zeus or Hercules? First, let's be clear, we're not asking, was Jesus the Son of God? We're asking something even simpler. Was there really a man named Jesus of Nazareth who lived in the first century, taught, gathered followers, was crucified, and allegedly rose again? That's a historical question. And like all historical questions, it's answered using sources. So, what are the sources? You might be surprised it's not just the Bible. Let's look today at biblical sources, early non Christian sources, and even check what a famous agnostic says on the subject. First, the New Testament, which includes 27 different documents or books, all pertain to Jesus and point to him being a real person. Yes, the New Testament counts. Why? Because the Gospels and letters were written by people close in time and place to Jesus. They were written within decades of his death, not centuries. These aren't distant legends, they are eyewitness testimony. To say that the authors of the New Testament are unreliable because they're Christians would be a prime example of the genetic fallacy, an informal logical fallacy. American historian Paul L. Meyer summarizes these sources nicely. Quote, not one of the four Gospels or the 23 other documents in the New Testament would make an ounce of sense if Jesus had never lived. Secondly, let's look at what ancient non Christian sources have to say about Jesus. Tacitus, a Roman historian, referred to Jesus being executed under Pontius Pilate. Josephus, a Jewish historian, mentioned Jesus, his crucifixion, and his brother James. Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor, once asked the Roman Emperor Trajan for advice on how to deal with Christians. The main reason was because they would not worship the emperor's image. He wrote that Christians would meet together regularly to sing to Christ as if to a god. Thales, the first century historian, amazingly wrote about the darkness and earthquake that took place during the time of the crucifixion of Jesus. Phlegon, another first century historian, also mentioned that same darkness and earthquake. Phlegon also said Jesus seemed to predict the future and that Christians believe Jesus rose after death and showed signs of his crucifixion. Celsus, the Roman philosopher, said Jesus was allegedly born of a virgin. His earthly father was a carpenter, and he had miraculous power. The Jewish Talmud says Jesus was executed the day before the Passover and that he had magical power. Suetonius, the Roman historian, said Jesus was a real man called the Christ, and he caused a Jewish disturbance. These writers weren't followers. They had no reason to promote Christianity. In fact, they weren't fans. That makes their testimony even more valuable. There are more early sources as well, both Christian and non Christian, but the point has been made. We can conclude, based on simply these early non Christian sources, that Jesus lived in the first third of the first century. He was Jewish. People believed he was born out of wedlock. He was a wise teacher. He performed wondrous feats or magic. He gathered disciples. He clashed with Jewish leaders. He was seen as the Messiah by some. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. There was darkness and an earthquake at the time of his death. His followers believed he rose from the dead. They worshiped him as God. Their numbers grew rapidly after his death, and his brother James was martyred by the high priest Ananus. That's a pretty detailed list, and all of it from sources outside the Bible itself. Lastly, let's look at impact. By the early second century, Christian communities had spread across the Roman Empire, all of them centered on a real historical person, not a made up figure. You don't have to take my word for it. Bart Ehrman, a skeptic and agnostic, said, the idea that Jesus did not exist is a modern notion. It has no ancient precedents. It was made up in the 18th century. One might as well call it a modern myth. The vast majority, secular, Christian, atheist, agree Jesus of Nazareth was a real person. So, did Jesus exist? Yes. Historically speaking, there is no doubt. The real question isn't if he lived, it's who was he? Was he just a man? Was he a prophet, a liar, a lunatic, or Lord? That's a conversation for another video. But if someone tells you Jesus was just a myth, now you know what the evidence actually says. Thanks for watching.